other than that, what the webinar is all about. So the main reason for why we're gathering here is to go through the top 5 and of course understand who's the actual winner of the challenge. Now, regarding the challenges itself, remember guys, these are monthly challenges. So every single month we create a new data set, we create a new sort of challenge, the rules and everything if there's any specifics that we want to cover there. But every single month you have a chance to participate in a challenge with different data sets, whether it's financial reporting, whether it's sales reporting, HR reporting, on different challenges, something like game analysis. The topic could be very various. And one of the things that I would say is if you do have any particular sort of topic that you would want to have as one of the challenges, you have a feedback form, which Sabina from time to time is going to post into the chat section. Actually, Sabina, if you could post the link to it straight away as well, that would be great. And within that feedback, make sure that you just let us know about these requests. Because if you let us know what you guys need or what are the topics, it's a lot easier for us to prepare things for the next webinar or the next challenge. But if you don't tell us, well, how are we supposed to know that you wanted to have a data set regarding, I don't know, let's say, top makeup agenda or whatever it is. So just let us know what you are interested in, and we'll make sure to make it a reality. So feedback is very important for us. Now, the way and how we're going to go through the top 5 submissions is, of course, going to be in random order. Makes sense, right? Otherwise, well, kind of going through it would, at least we go to the last report, you would know who the winner is. This way, you don't really know. We're going to announce it at the very end. We go through these reports and we give our feedback from our experience. Now, one of the things that I want to emphasize here as well as every other time is do not consider to what we say to be something that is written in stone, right? These are our opinions. This is something that we've seen in our experience. This is what we see is working currently. It doesn't mean that that is the only option out there and there's nothing else would work better or the same as what we're providing here. So everything we tell you is just something that allows you to think about it slightly differently, or at least pinpoint things that you should take into consideration when building either ZoomCharts visuals or even the regular slicers, card visuals, whatever it is. Just something that allows you to have a clear guideline on how to cover certain things. All right. I think we can start off with the first one, right?
Absolutely.
So the first report that has gotten itself into the top 5 and the first author who's done it, let me go ahead and share my screen, grabbing it away, hiding this little tooltip as always. So congratulations to Dilip Venkata Prasad Boha. So you are one of the top 5 report authors who have gotten here. And let's take a closer look at the report and actually see what you have done here. Let's open up the embedded version. It's just going to be a little bit easier to go through it. So the way and how we're going to go through this time is slightly different. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to go back and forth with Yanis, and we're going to go through every one of the pages. So we're going to cover one page from both sides and then go to the next one. As far as this report goes, so one of the things that I like about it is, and some of you might not agree with me, but I like the simplicity of it, right? There's not too many visuals. There are not too many cards, slicers, or anything. I think it's enough to have certain levels of detail into it. The main measures, which from my side, I think is just purely enough. Giannis is probably going to disagree with me, but I want to know how much in revenue I got, how much I spend, how much is my profit, and what's the profit margin. That's what I need to know. Giannis is going to tell you if there's something else. The other thing that I like about it is an interesting approach, which is slightly challenging to, let's say, implement perfectly. Even I had challenges to kind of figure out how to do this, but I like the fact that I can quickly switch the two visuals between the expense sort of overview and revenue overview. So I can play around with two different overviews to see, okay, how are my expenses looking on monthly wise and waterfall, and based on the category, or how are my revenue categories working. So that's one of the cool things here. Yeah, for these visuals, I would probably say that one of the things that I noticed, and this is not just for this report, this is something that a lot of you have done in this challenge, is I know that there weren't a lot of dimensions, but always remember one of the things we said is you can always enhance the data set. Either it's targets that you create, either it's additional years that you add on top of it, anything that allows you to make a better story. So in this case, one of the things that I would want to have slightly different is to have a bit more dimensions here. Because as we see, okay, it's time, it's basically, a year based on a month, year based on a month, year based on a month. It's all the same dimensions, which when you start to interact with certain visuals, the tricky part about this is that as soon as I get into 1 month, well, everything else gets into 1 month, right? It doesn't automatically drill down to the second level if there's something available there. So it's one of those interactions that can easily break the user experience, but it can also easily be switched, because even if we take a look at the same chart right here, right, where if we click on a particular month, we go down to business line. If you would have switched this around and had the business line first and then the monthly overview afterwards, it would give me the possibility to, first of all, have another dimension, because right here I already have the subgroups for expenses and revenues. Then I would have the business lines, and this one can stay. That's the yearly line, and waterfall can stay as well, but that would give the user a little bit more flexibility. And for this one as well, I would probably say that the one thing when I'm looking at expenses and revenue always is I want to understand, okay, but how much is the sort of, what's the actual value that I got from it? I had my revenue, I had my expenses, how much did I make here? And you wouldn't necessarily have to put it in a visual as a line or a column, but at least add it as a tooltip field so that I can take an at least understanding of, okay, that's how much I spent, that's how much I got, what's the difference? Just as an idea, this is probably what I would have used, right? As an idea, because what I'm essentially using is total expenses and revenue. And in the tooltip, you can see in the chart itself, there's no column for difference, but in the tooltip, I'm using the difference. So I can clearly see how much I got here. And for one of the columns, I would have used conditional formatting, because when I'm going through different, for example, business lines, I could clearly see months which are doing good or bad. So just with these few small changes in one single visual, I think this page would have gotten a lot better, but it's a good page. I have nothing against it. It's just that a little bit more diversity would be nice. Yanis, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Iris. I think you covered quite a lot of the information already, so I'll just add a little bit on top of that. One thing that I wanted to point out is that for me as a CEO, one of the things that matter, and it's not just for this report, but for any report, is that it's not that I'm always at the computer. Sometimes I'm on the go. So what I really need is I need an ability to quickly access all of the data wherever I are. And so therefore, in particular, for this particular case, I looked at all the reports using a handheld device. So this is, for instance, here how the report looks like on the device. So you can see it fits in your hand, and this is how I analyze them. And I'll have additional comments with regards to usability from the mobile perspective, which is super important. And given that, so in this report, what was nice is that you have like most critical ratios at the top. I mean, the data set was very limited, so we're not going into the details of the data itself, but from what's available there. One thing I really liked is that you have this waterfall-ish chart of the net profit that shows how you're doing every month. And in fact, when you click into that, it's super nice that in every month you can actually very easily go inside and see what's going on in that period. One thing that I would suggest is that you should improve the ordering, because typically when you're looking at net profit, so typically it starts with the sales and then you have cost of goods sold and so on. So this is a little bit of an improvement that could make it even better. I completely agree with Ivis on the fact that there wasn't an easy way to switch between the business lines, because that was kind of one of the idea of the data set. You have a number of business lines. And so me, from the business perspective, the general questions in reports like these is, okay, so I have a target revenue, target EBITDA, target net profit. So I need to be able to see all of those. And more importantly, I need to be able to quickly understand why we're not hitting something, right? If the revenue is below the target, so I need to be able to go into the revenue quickly and see which business line is not performing, right? Whether it's a trend, whether it's a one-off event, which product line, and so on. Similarly, if the profitability is not at the level it should be, again, it's influenced by two things. You have revenue, and then you have the cost of goods sold and other expenses. So maybe the revenue was fine, but it was the sudden spike in the cost of goods sold, for instance, right? and things like that. Therefore, would be really helpful in a report like that if I can quickly see the overview and very easily go into the details. So I was looking at all these reports if I can do that. And here I can do some of that, but clearly that's a room for improvement if you added a bit more these kind of drill downs for the business lines and then product lines, and similar with for expenses, right? So you have like expense groups and subgroups. And on the next level, obviously, I'd like to see like how it compares month to month to see where the details are. But returning to this main page, yes, at the bottom, completely agree that 2 lines is good, but I mean, ideally, it should be also 1 line showing like the difference. I mean, at the top, you have the waterfall chart, which kind of is the difference between the two, but I mean, there's probably a little bit too many charts for my liking, because lately I've been going in a direction where I have maybe fewer charts, but more of the so-called field parameters. And then this gives me ability to choose which measures I'm going to look at, also what hierarchies I'm going to drill into. And just by adding a couple of field parameters, you can have so much fewer charts, but still get all that information. So when we're talking about like operational kind of review and exploration, that's way to go. When you just need like a snapshot, then it's fine to have many charts as you have here. So I think that's it on that page.
All right, let's go to the second one. For the second one, since I started out first and, took maybe some things away from your side, anything you want to specifically mention on this one?
Right, so on this page, so I like the idea of the expense breakdown. So it kind of, again, provides you this overview of what's going on. For instance, in expenses, you can see that particular hierarchy. But again, this can be overwhelming in real world experience, real world use case where you have like too many categories. So one of my suggestions would be maybe not to expand all of that, but in fact, maybe have a look at drill down graph visual where you can achieve similar layout, but use the focus node mode, meaning that you start with like the top as a node, you click on that, and then expand shows the next levels. And so it's kind of a similar network flow, but it lets you go in a direction that you're interested in, because this can get really overwhelming very quickly. And you already see that there's an arrow because there's not enough space to show all of the expense subgroups because there's so many of those. So this is a good add-in, but I'd suggest also exploring Network Drill Down Graph Pro as an alternative, because it shows less information initially and helps you fine-tune what you're seeing. But that's anyway, it's a good twist, and it shows kind of this all breakdown. So from that perspective, that was good.
Yep. From my side is I like the fact that you switched to different KPI metrics since you're focusing on different sort of analysis here. But the one thing that I caught up first is that basically every single visual in first page, we didn't have the business line available straight away. We only had it on the second level. On this page, business line is available everywhere. You have a slicer for the business line. You have 2 different donuts where the business line is being used. So again, a little bit more diversity would be nice here. But besides that, I like the fact that you have the ability to, for example, just simply choose one of the business lines and then focus on it. For example, the same expense breakdown, you can then afterwards just open up a single path and see how it's being split up on the particular view. So that's one of the cool things. The other cool thing that I sort of liked about it or noticed about it is, trust me, guys, as much as you want, you can't fully run away from tables. You can't. Trust me, especially in these sort of analysis when it's financial analysis, people are going to ask for a table sooner or later. It's just inevitable. Trust me. And one of the things that I like that it is the fact that you have a table. The few things that is not just for this report, but also something that I noticed in a lot of reports. Make sure you format your numbers so it's easier for the end user to read them. And here, one of the things is just 1,000 separator. Would be just a lot easier to notice here. And the reason why we're talking about these small little things is because every little small detail matters, guys. Trust me. As soon as you don't do one thing or the other one, people are just gonna, come at you for every single angle, and it's just gonna become overwhelming. So make sure you cover the bases. And the other thing is this line right here. So we do have the EBIT right here for the total, but it's not a part of the expenses. It's not a line that has any meaning behind it. So as an end user, it seems to me that something has broken or is not working properly. So it's a tricky line that you have to cover. So make sure that even if there is a view where you have an additional row of data where only one metric appears, make sure to name it somehow so user understands why is it there. So it's not just blank, right? So just be cautious with these sort of things.
Yeah, I mean, if I can drop in on that
Yeah,
one.
sure.
So when we're talking about the table, and especially here, once this is more focused about expenses, so EBIT is not expense subgroup on its own, right? So
Yeah.
I think that probably shouldn't have been here. And yeah, and also other one is that really helps, at least for me, is when you use some conditional formatting, meaning if it's a negative, make it red, if it's positive, then whatever, make it green, but make them stand out. And of course, use currency symbols, thousand separators, use like kind of abbreviations if necessary, because that makes parsing blobs of text so much easier and so much faster. You immediately see where you need to pay attention, right? Because otherwise, if it's just like a little minus sign, it's not visible. And yeah, maybe add also some table header saying what that table is really all about, why it's there. So why I should look, what I'll find there, because right now this is very confusing, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. All right, and the last page was this one. So for this one, the main comment I would say is less is more. Because the one thing you guys gonna notice here is the one thing I know said to you also on the first page is that if the same dimension is being used everywhere, like these three donuts, they showcase different value but the same dimensions. As soon as the user clicks on one of them, the two other become obsolete. Right? So most likely what I would have done here is just use something like a combo chart, which would allow me to define each business line as a separate cluster. And within that cluster, I would have those metrics right next to each other so I can see the overall situation, especially since it's total revenue, total sales, and net profit. I can use them in a zero-based stack and then net profit, for example, right next to them to kind of see how it compares to the total revenue, something like that. But yeah, that's the main thing about this one.
I have one tricky one that actually I think everyone should really pay attention to. Let's focus in on the donut that's to our right, which says net profit by business line.
Okay.
Guys, net profit can be negative. You do not want to put negative and positive values in a donut. It would not work. So it should be either all negative or all positive. So that's another reason not to use donut if you can have unexpected these ranges of values. Use combo or combo bar, you'll be safe in a safer position. It's easy thing to fall into. So, but keep in mind, if the value can be negative, be careful with the donut.
Absolutely.
And one more thing is, if we're looking at the bottom, if we have a couple of charts there showing net profit and profit margin on one hand, but then total sales by quarter and month. So one thing that I think, again, a few people don't know, you don't really need to have another chart for showing quarter data, because Timeline Pro has built-in option for user to toggle between months to quarter to year. So if they have this need, they can easily switch this aggregation value directly in the visual. So you don't have to have a couple of visuals. Again, you save space. You have one visual that shows you all these different time aggregation units. And on top of that, again, I cannot stop suggesting that, have a field parameter for what metrics you want to include in that timeline. That's so easy. You just tap on the things you need and they appear, and you change between values. So this adds so much more flexibility. So ideally, here we probably have only two charts. One would be the timeline, which I would put at the top, and then at the bottom we would have a couple of combo charts showing a couple of series grouped by these business lines, and maybe add some more hierarchy, because there was like a product line as a next dimension there as well.
Yep.
So think about this multi-dimensional analysis, because once you set it up like that, the business user can more freedomly sort of work with data, and they can ask more questions without you having to create a number of different reports. So this will, at the end of the day, save time for you, because you need to create less reports that have more information and more access to data beneath.
Yep. All right, let's go to the next one. So
Absolutely.
again, congratulations for getting into the top 5. Let's go to the next submission, which is coming from Iris Mayuto Krego. So congratulations to you. and let's quickly go through the report. Let's open up in the embedded version like I usually do. The reason why I do this, guys, in the embedded version is because whenever you embed something in an iframe, it's just smaller. When you open up the embedded version, it just gets a little bit bigger. It's one of the things that I usually also would recommend. Just make sure you test it out on different views, different screens, different views, full screens, minimized screen, just so you see what happens with the chart. Because sometimes the things that you see are gonna make you shiver. Trust me. All right. For this one, on the initial glance, what I like about is similar to the previous one. I like that it's simple and yet efficient, right? You have the top metrics at the top right here: revenue, expenses, gross profit, EBIT, and net profit. So that's all good. You have the ability of, I'm guessing these are actually field parameters based on the user experience sort of that I'm getting here. So using field parameters is a good approach. It allows you to switch between different specific metrics. The only other thing that I was noticing here is the tooltips. So this is something that you have to be very cautious about. Whenever you use, if you use our tooltips, you're going to see we have two modes, light mode and dark mode. Whenever you switch between them, make sure that everything is visible. Like what we do by default is we inherit the color of the column. So it's a little bit easier to find it afterwards in the tooltip. Sorry for that. But what happens when you're using a dark mode, in this case, for example, you can see the first line where we have 483,000 is a black one. The column isn't fully black, it's slightly gray, but it's pretty much impossible to see the name of the first line. Wouldn't matter what you put into it, it's pretty much impossible to see it. So make sure you just, again, look at the tooltips, look at how data is being visualized, look at what properties are being utilized. Make sure that the end user sees what you're showcasing. I get it that it fits in with the theme, but if the theme doesn't allow you to read the data, the theme has to change. It's quite as simple. You have to adapt to make sure that everything is visible for the end user. Other than that, it's quite simple. You have the approach of field parameters. This is an overview page, and if you filter something out, you have a clear slicer button, which works as expected. So everything's good there. Yanis, from your side.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this report, there's a couple of things that really stand out. Again, I'm going to bring in a little device here. And the reason why I'm bringing it is because, as you can see, when I'm holding it in the left hand, I can use this navigation so easily with the thumb. So just with the thumb, I can quickly go through different sections. And this was really like, wow, perfect. As if it was designed to do it this way. Because again, it's important to save time, also navigation and things like that. But going back to the overview page, so again, at a glance, it looks really good, but then there are things that I think should be further improved. One of them being that when you, again, select the KPI, you can see that the title for that card is changing, where you have the chart, but actual series names are not. And then if you're doing only the hover of any of the values there, you don't really understand what that actually is. There's like a percentage, there's dollar, but what is it, right? And so it kind of creates a confusion. That's one thing. But secondly, break-even point as such doesn't really make sense when you are looking at ratios like gross profit, EBITDA, interest and tax, because you don't want to compare it to the break-even point. And what is break-even point to begin with? Because at the end of the day, it's the net profit that you're looking at, or EBITDA, that really makes sense. So if that's positive, then you're good. So you should kind of look at it if it makes sense to show it all times, and if it is, then maybe also add some reasoning why you think it should be there. Then also I noticed that at the bottom you have this waterfall, but somehow this data model is not properly constructed, because if you select, I don't know, COGS at the bottom, then all of a sudden there's some weird things going on elsewhere. So that's kind of a suggestion that if you have a couple of charts, just make sure if these cross-filtering interactions make sense. Sometimes it's reasonable just to turn off the filtering if it doesn't make sense, right? And also feel free to add a couple of layers, because for instance here, if we see revenue of like 17.56, I'd love to click on that and see the business lines, for instance, and business products straight away. Like, why not? And so things like that make it feel more useful. Well, not just to have like a summary, but also having an ability to drill into things. And one more thing is that it's not very obvious to begin with, but actually, again, it's this little thing that the devil's in the details type of thing, colors. I personally like that colors are being used to provide meaning, right? Meaning that one color typically should denote one thing. Here we can see that, for instance, yellow is at the top cards, but then it's also a percentage line, and then at the bottom, all of a sudden, it's both net profit, EBITDA, and even gross profit. So what is yellow? Well, yellow is nothing. So therefore, once I see that I cannot use color to get context. So there's no context to the color. So it looks kind of good, but it's meaningless. And so this is something to think about, where you can combine good color with the meaning. And this is, again, why you need to do it, because you want to have more intuitive exploration. And more importantly, if you have the same color coding, and I suggest you create kind of a color guidebook for your report and stick to that through all the pages. And if you have multiple reports, create guidebook for the entire set of reports, it will be so much better, because the business user, when they switch from report to the report, they know what they're looking at. They know that, like, let's say a blue is forecast and an orange is whatever the current value is. So this is really what's add to the speed of interpreting the data. Because otherwise it looks nice, but I mean, it could be even better if that had additional meaning there. So just a couple of ideas how you can take it to the next level. But yeah, I mean, perfectly. This navigation thing was a ton that was so perfect, and yeah, thank you for that.
Especially since you got it opened up on a phone, right?
Yeah, that's a phone. So it's we got this test device recently. So because we're testing reports on all types of devices, so I was kind of surprised how nice they actually work there.
Right time, right place. Simple.
Yep.
All right. The one other thing I wanted to quickly cover here, or kind of emphasize on, is I'm going to skip a couple of pages and quickly go to the table. The reason for this is because, like I said, guys, right? As much as you would want to get away from it, especially for financial analysis, it's impossible to get away from a table. Trust me, it's impossible. And one of the things that I like about having a table like this is because what it makes me feel like the report auto has achieved essentially is you allow the user to have basically two approaches. You could go through the visuals, through different overview pages, revenues, expenses, and look at different views. But the table is just something where you have things summarized and you can look at a row level entry. And if this is something that's more comfortable to you, you can go ahead and use this one. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is one of the approaches and that the other one's better. It depends on the end user, right? So that's one of the things. But the other thing that I would probably go ahead and do here is maybe switch these, instead of just regular slicers, into visuals. And the reason for that is visual context. What I mean by this is right now, I don't know which month was doing better than the other one. I just have a list of months. I have a list of quarters. I have a list of business lines. There's no context whatsoever. So if I want to see which month I did the best, I physically would have to go through every single one of them, note down how much I made in the net profit at the very end, and then kind of hope for God that I remember which one was the top one. So something just either as a timeline or a combo chart, anything that would allow me visually to see, okay, I did the best on this month. This is the overall trend across the year. Same goes for business line. Which one did the best, right? Because if you guys remember, for example, on this example, revenue versus expenses, right? It seems okay on all of them, for example, when we're looking at them. So overall, we're doing okay. But if I actually start to look at things, okay, sports and equipment, there was 1 month where we didn't meet the target. Great. I can take a look at that. Nutrition and supplement, hey guys, I think there's something wrong with this business line. We need to figure things out. But overall, things seem good. So that's why it's important to give that visual context to the user. So always think about whether or not, because there are cases where this approach would be definitely a lot better. And that is where you do not necessarily want to provide that visual context in order to not confuse the user. There are cases where this might be applicable. But in this one, it just seems logical to showcase that sort of perspective as well. Yeah, I don't know. For this one, Giannis, any comments from your side?
Yeah, I mean, exactly the same comments. I mean, but this is normal, because quite many report creators, well, this is how it all started, and why we have slicers in the first place, where this thinking is coming from. It's coming from the Excel times, where you have like columns, and on the columns you have the filter thing, and so we are just primed to think that way by default. However, the good news is with the Power BI, all of a sudden we can replace the regular slicers with the visuals that can act as a slicers. And in the visual, the biggest benefit is that you can see before you slice. So it's kind of telling you before you do the action where you should do it. So unless this is a data export tool, and in data export tool, this makes sense. You don't need any visual. You need specifically export all months or whatever quarters, where you configure how you want to export data. But if it's not for exporting, if it's for consuming data, then certainly I'd suggest replacing the traditional slicers with the visual slicers, because they do the same thing. They provide you this visual hint and provide quick and easy way to filter things. And with the timeline drill down visual, it already comes with this year, quarter, month hierarchy. So, and even more so in the visual, you can choose like, okay, I need quarters. So you can go quarters and you pick any quarter you want to, and you have that in your chart. And in table, one more thing is that, of course, as soon as you start to select something, for me, it's always about comparing it to something, right? So just plain number tells you nothing. You need to compare it whether to the same period last year or to the budget or to the forecast or whatever the other relevant metric there is. So just plain number on its own doesn't tell anything really. So think about adding a bit more context to it, and then it will be even better.
Absolutely. What else about this report? So one of the things that I actually liked is the glossary page. The reason for this is quite simple. Sometimes in your reports, especially when there are specific definitions and calculations being involved, this sort of page helps just to make sure that you understand which one is used correctly, or if there are any changes done. Some companies do some adjustments on their own side. The other thing that I would probably rethink, I like that it's all here, but the info button for me felt that it's a little bit out of place. The reason for it is quite simple. You had your pages navigation, you had your glossary, which was basically as an additional page, but the info button always opens up an info overlay for each individual page, which from a mobile perspective, yeah, would work great because you have the same thumb just controlling everything. But for me, when I go here, just going back to info, getting back, it felt tedious in a sense. I would probably make the info overlay something closer here to the clear filters button, because those are additional items that you have on every single page. That's just my sort of thought process here. I don't know, anything else, Mara, Giannis, that you want to emphasize on this report?
Yeah, good catch about the info. I typically move it on top right corner or somewhere like there, and this is how it usually helps, at least in other reports I've seen. So like question marks info, just top right corner. That's the place to have them. But overall, it's kind of a nice touch. I mean,
Yeah,
especially if there's tons of things to drill into, then that's absolutely a good one to have.
because it can help especially new users to understand that there are more drill down levels here, for example, that you can do some
Absolutely.
sort of exploration. If you use a timeline visual, you explain to them that in order to select a time period, you just hold the leftmost button and create a selection. So just explaining simple things, the info overlays can be very beneficial. But yeah, again, congratulations to you, Iris. So you have gotten into the top 5. Let's go to the next report. So the next report is from Divya Pardeshi. So congratulations, Divya, in getting into the top 5. Let's open up the report and take a closer look at it. So the report starts off with this sort of overview page where you choose which path you want to explore and a little bit of a problem statement and situation analysis, which might work in certain situations, and it does help newer users, for example, to understand what the report is about. But in some cases, just be careful with these sort of initial pages, because sometimes it just feels like an unnecessary step that you have to go through in order to get to what you're actually looking for. Other than that, I have nothing against it. Just be careful whenever you're creating these. Make sure you just double check with the end user. Does he really want one of these? Trust me, I've made the same mistake. I've done this, and then the user's like, why is this there? Well, I just felt like, it kind of works, but really it doesn't. But if we go into the subpages, so financial analysis, we can see that the sort of overlay is going to be exactly the same for everything. So we have the navigation bar on the left-hand side. We have the home button, which takes us here, which might have been something I would probably create a bigger distance, because right now, otherwise it feels to me like this is, sort of like the second page of full report, and that's supposed to be the first page. So I might have moved it up a bit just from a visual perspective. Other than that, when it comes to these visuals, I like that you have used not necessarily a typical line that's been done here. That's the smoothed out line, but you're actually used the stepped out line. So I like that approach. You have the possibility of switching between whether you're looking at things from a monthly perspective or quarterly. If the report decides to allow me to do something, there we go. We've all been there. We've all been there, right? Trying to do something and just they're gonna say no. So, and the one thing that I want to explicitly say thank you for doing this is the following. You guys see right here under the cards, you have a place which currently seems empty, right? There's nothing there. Well, that's because unless you have selected a quarter or you have selected a month, there is no month over month comparison because there's nothing specific to compare against. So this is a nice catch, and I really appreciate that you took your efforts to create something like that, because it makes sense, right? If we're looking at the whole year and you would have month over month sort of comparison, what are you comparing against? Is it the last month versus, like, basically if you have a year, is it December versus November? Is it January versus last year's December? What is it, right? I don't know. So it just, again, might have created confusion. The use of field parameters is a nice touch here. I would have probably done something with field parameters on multiple visuals and then have sort of maybe a side panel, which is controlled through field parameters where you can look at different metrics. So that's one of the things. As far as the select month and select quarter, my personal opinion is these are kind of obsolete. You have the visuals to do that, and you have multiple of them. You can select a month here, here, here. You don't need extra slicers to do that once more, right? You can cross-filter things from the visuals themselves. So why do you need a specific month selection here? So those are sort of the main important things I noticed when I first opened up. Yanis, to you.
Yeah, thank you. So again, looking at this particular page, so at a glance, it looks kind of a nice overview of all sorts of measures, and I can see that this is being built with the idea where you have like sort of a dashboard type of report where you open it up and you have like all the information at once, and which is useful if that's the purpose. Me, more often I see in the situations where I have specific angles that I want to analyze and have the analysis going more in details of that particular angle, right? And one of the things that I like is that there's not so many like timeline charts, but maybe just have like one and then have an option to select what you want to see there. Because again, it creates it more concise, and more importantly, if you have one timeline chart, it's very natural and very easy way to control the time dimension in your report page. And so if that was ZoomCharts drill down timeline pro visual, then we wouldn't need to have those selectors at the top that I've already pointed out. But also we would need to have those buttons like month and quarter selection. So you're saving time by not having to add those. And more importantly, what unfortunately you cannot do here easily, but what I happen to need to do quite often is, for instance, in timeline visual, very often I need to select some arbitrary periods, like let's say April to June, June to September, like first quarter, like first 6 months or so. And I'm so used to ZoomCharts' way of doing that. I know, Ives, maybe you can show it. Just like that, you use your mouse and you select whatever period you want. So it takes like less than a second. And immediately this works as a filter, and all around you see all the metrics representing like all comparisons, all revenue aspects, and whatever you are analyzing there corresponding to that selection. Once you try that, once your users see how to use that, it's very addictive because it's so easy, and it provides you this flexibility, because as soon as you deselect, you're back to your initial view, right? And you're selecting only things that matter to you. And so I'd suggest taking this report to the next level by reducing the number of timeline components there, and try using Timeline Pro Visual instead. That will provide you this nice selection, nice filtering. You'll not need those additional slicers, and you'll have all in one chart. That would be one thing. Another one is that at the bottom, you have like this spline line. But you have to be cautious, because in financial world, when we are looking at two adjacent months, they are connected with like a curve. But in real world, there is no curve, because you have only two dots. There is a value for December and there is a value for November. And this curve shows that there's a trend, how you transition from one month to another, but it's not necessarily so. You have to go into the days view to actually see what the transition was. So this can be misleading, and therefore I'm not using lines where there's no continuous data streams, and this is not continuous. They're like separate data points. So rather use columns, or as at the top use like a kind of rectangular line. That's more appropriate because it shows you these snapshot values and they're not continuous. So be careful when using that. And on top of that, use labels, right? So I mean, it doesn't cost anything. Just enable labels, and it will be much more readable, because the first two charts, they're nice, but I mean, you really have to look carefully to understand what the values are. And again, on Timeline Pro Visual, you can certainly have two value axes. So if you have two values, for instance, ratio and absolute value, you can still visualize both without having to squeeze those values to like the 0 point. You can have like the revenue on the left-hand side value axis, but the percentages on the right-hand side, and they'll still be legible and look nice. And the value labels make it so much more easy to grasp and understand. And of course, conditional formatting. So provide some context. Yeah. Is it good, bad? Are we growing, not growing? So try to help user to navigate the data to find meaningful insights.
Absolutely. Regarding the other page, I like the fact that you're sort of sticking to the same layout. Sure, some of the pages change a little bit, but this is a visual that I've seen in a lot of reports as well in the submissions. And the only question I have for these is, what benefit does the gauge serve you here? Because currently you're just showcasing that it's getting somewhere based on something. It would make sense if you have set or created some sort of targets which you're trying to meet. Then I would understand that, okay, you started off from 0, the target was like, 25%, we've gone way overboarded. So I can see that, okay, we definitely exceeded the target. Otherwise, these are just circles that are getting filled. Net profit margin can go above 100%. So what's going to happen with the donut? It's going to start to go in the third color. It's going to start to separate itself into smaller segments. Like, no, it's probably going to just be a full circle, which at that point is going to be completely obsolete. Because just be careful when you're creating visuals. Think about those sort of edge cases. Trust me, it might seem annoying or picky that I'm doing this, but let's be realistic, right? Net profit margin can go over 100%. It can also be negative. So what's going to happen if it's a negative one? We got a bad year. We went backwards. So how do I read the chart? Is it the light blue part that I'm reading? Is it the dark blue part that I'm reading? So just be careful with these situations and think about whether or not the visual is right for the use case. It's just as simple as that. Other than that, like I said, right, you can't get away from these guys. Trust me, you can, especially for financial analysis. You can't get away from them. But other than that, I would like to say that it's a great report. The chart number might have been slightly smaller, like Yanis already mentioned. You could have combined some of them in a single chart, just with filled parameters and allowing the user to focus on one or the other thing. Playing around with different workarounds as well. Like, for example, like Yanis mentioned, for example, the same timeline, it has also the ability to have a secondary y-axis. And way on how we've used also the secondary y-axis. And this is sort of a workaround. You can create, for example, a series which gives you the growth rate, month-over-month growth rate. So starting from February, you're going to have a growth rate on month-to-month comparison. If you wanted to have it always visible, you could say that that's going to be assigned to the secondary y-axis. And on the secondary y-axis, you do this simple trick. You find the custom value ranges, and you say that the minimum value is going to be 0, for example, or depending on where it's going to go. You could say that the minimum value is actually -1, which means minus 100%, and the maximum is also -1. So what this is going to do is going to force the chart basically to showcase all the value labels at the top. So it's going to always be above the minimum, right? So it's an interesting way on how you can play around with the formatting options of the visuals, and just make sure to do this. Play around with them, see what you can do with them. And if you have any questions, there's a reason why we give you direct access to us. There's a reason why there's a webinars@zoomcharts.com email where you can reach out, ask any questions. You have the support team that can help you with these sort of scenarios. Don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing that can happen with asking is not getting an answer, okay? But does it really change anything for you? You would have tried to do it your ways anyways. So there's nothing you physically lose without getting an answer. You can still try to figure it out on your own. Trust me. It's the way that the world works, right? Sometimes you get answers, sometimes you don't. But you don't really lose anything when you ask question.
But just
But
to
yeah,
be sure, if you
yeah,
ask questions or support team, we always respond. So
yes.
yeah, one way or another, you'll certainly get an answer from us.
Yep. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, and trust me, Giannis would catch us.
Yeah, we have a report for that.
Exactly. We have reports for everything. All right. So the next submission that has gotten into the top 5 comes from Agbada Dixonokaloya. So congratulations. Let's open up the report in embedded version. And for this one, I would say I like the fact that it's, again, the principle that I typically go for is 3 to 4 charts. I do not count cards as charts. Those are different visual types. Those are cards. But 3 to 4 visuals, few cards, some navigation items, that's mostly what you need for a report page for it to work. And this is what this is basically doing. The only thing that I noticed straight away, and that this is something I mentioned to you guys in the previous report, is remember this month over month. When I'm looking at all of the months, what am I comparing this to? This is really not a month over month. It's something in between, but I don't really know what it is exactly. So careful with these. Other than that, it's the same layout for all the pages. I like this approach. I've done this many times, and we also have this in our example gallery. It's a quick way on how you can compare actual versus targets. The only other thing that I would probably done is add a bit of conditional formatting, like I said. Because if you go in, for example, if you would also have business lines as the primary object, it would allow me to see, for example, how different months are working for different business lines. But currently, it's always going to be the same, right? It's always going to be gray, and it's always going to be pink, purple, magenta, one of these type of colors. That's one thing. And the other thing, when it comes to colors, make thing you have them unanimized everywhere, meaning that if you define that an increase is in green and decrease is in red, make sure you showcase this everywhere. Because, for example, currently, let's try to simulate there. No, there we go. We got the red color at least. You can see that this is red. This is orange. But if I go to the full view, the red is still orange, right? Green is 2 different shades of green. So just unanimize the experience. So it's a lot simpler to what Giannis already mentioned, right? Same color means same thing. It's a lot easier for the user, and just pure visual reflection of things, how we perceive information. Same thing means same color. I can a lot easier and sort of faster navigate through the report and see what's in there. As for the other pages, I like the fact that you went with a little bit of diversity, but some of these pages, since they're even using exactly the same layout, you could have easily just used field parameters to allow the user to just switch between the property that you're going through and use exactly the same page. The reason why that would be beneficial is because in certain cases that also allows to actually enhance the performance. Sometimes it's faster to switch between the field parameters than to switch between the pages and load in completely fresh new batch of data that you're basically getting there. So play around with those. Other than that, there's an information overlay. So that's good. There's a reset button that works pretty fine. 2 different timelines right next to each other. Would probably, again, use one or the other, or combine them and then use field parameters. Whether it's based on groups of metrics, whether it's based on a single metric, that's completely up to you. Yanis.
Yeah, thank you for such a nice overview. Yeah, again, congratulations on being among top 5. So on this one, talking about these month-over-month markers, so it's good at least that you have them, but as I was pointed out, do not show them or show blank if a particular month is not selected. But there's again one classical error, which is you are showing that 10% month-over-month expense increase is green, but it's actually red. how expense increase can be green. So think about meaning of the data. Not always all increases are good. Expense increase is not good, so it should be red. So there should be also, you should be careful with things like these, because otherwise, again, you're using color green to provide me a good feeling that it's all good, but it actually isn't. But it's easy to fall into because it's a little tiny detail where you need to look at it from the other perspective. Other thing actually I liked is that you use this waterfall, but also added this quarterly summary, which kind of provides you a nice way of how things are going. But again, given that this is revenue, that's one angle, but most certainly I'm more interested in not only just revenue, but also the net profit. So I guess that at the beginning, you should have either an ability to quickly toggle between those two measures, or if not, then yeah, at least let users select whatever they are more interested into. Because for every business, for like 99% of 99% businesses, the main KPI at the end of the day is still profit, right? So business owners need to be able to see what's going on with the profit. If it's growing, if it's not growing, and then take it from there. Because if you have lots of revenue, but even more expensive than that, your business is not growing, and so you're in trouble. So while big revenue number is good, but at the same time, if you have great losses, that's not kind of an ideal situation to be in. So think about also from the business perspective, what is it the most important thing that they need to see first, and then take it from there on. And of course, use field parameters to have fewer charts. And same problem was not using labels, not using secondary value access, but also the spline lines. They look kind of fancy, but again, remember that these are not continuous values. So just use columns or bars. And then also, if you want to show months over months difference, you can have additional line marker or other thing like that just to provide an idea, or even change the color based on what's going on. It will be more concise, more easy understandable, because now the bottom two are really difficult to read, and I'm not seeing much value of them. And in the donut visual, please don't do donut visuals like these. Always sort them by the largest value first if you ever use donut or pie. This is a classical error of how not to do donut, right? So please don't do it like that.
Yeah, there's a reason why it's a default setup for us. Value, so that it's a lot easier for the end user to understand how things are growing out.
Yeah, well, here it's probably sorted by the name, but
Name, yeah, looks like it.
but
Yeah.
better use the value. This is much better.
All right. So the last submission that has gotten himself into the top 5 comes from Ananya Bamishra. So congratulations to you. Let's open up the report and take a closer look at it. So for this one, my initial sort of feeling was, I appreciate the level of detail that you kind of created here. But for an end user who sees this for the first time, I can tell you this is going to be too much. It's a bit too overwhelming. There's 6 different charts. There's multiple deltas, multiple comparisons, multiple things I need to pay attention to. What is the first thing that you want me to notice here? Remember that when you create some sort of an overview page, you need to emphasize on the main thing. Like Yanis already mentioned, for any company, at the end of the day, it's going to be the profit. Here, profit is at the very bottom in the middle, sure, but it's in no way, shape, or form even sort of, kind of emphasized on. You could have made it a little bit bigger, or put a rectangle around it, whatever you do, or place it first. Make sure you create a data story from starting from the most important part to the least important part. It's still all important, but there is always an order to things. Nothing in this world is appropriately equally important. It doesn't work like that. One thing has to always take priority. So that's one of the things. But the other thing that I appreciate here is the fact that even though you're not using our timeline, I get it, fine, not everyone's taste. But the fact that I appreciate here is that you force the user to select a particular month, and you do not allow him to select multiple months. The reason why I appreciate this is because you are comparing up against the previous month. So you're forcing the user to have always the right behavior. We saw a different approach for another report where we saw that if, for example, the whole period is selected, these wouldn't be here. But this is also an interesting approach that might work, because even though you're forcing the user to look at a particular month, he's at least not going to see unrecognizable numbers there, or numbers without a meaning. He's always going to compare it to something. And if I select January, well, there's unfortunately just nothing to compare to. So that's fine. So, but at least you're not allowing him to go berserk and just select random things and see different numbers. You are guiding him in that sense. If we go to inside page, Now, this feels to me more like an overview page, I'll be honest. That felt more like a deeper analysis page. We have our main KPI metrics. We have few visuals where we controlled the timeline, where we control the categories for the for the expense group or revenue group and the subgroup. I like the fact that you also created something like this where you allow the user to switch between different views. So these visual switches and field parameters is something that you guys are going to notice more and more. It's just because it gives so much flexibility to a single report. It's kind of hard to explain how much flexibility really gives, because the more you play around with it, the more options you see that it gives you, the more ideas it gives you, the more bookmarks you can eliminate and just make everything fully dynamic. So appreciate this one. The income statement, I said you can't get away from them. So this is always going to be appreciated in a financial statement or any sort of financial analysis. The information overlay is okay, but one thing that I would probably do is instead of sort of cutting out the area that you want to emphasize on, I would probably not just cut it out, but also highlight it a little bit. In this case, it's maybe not that, let's say, sort of noticeable or bad, but the one thing that kind of doesn't fit in fully is because the navigation button, the active one, is exactly the same color, so it kind of blends in a little bit. Make sure that if you're emphasizing on something, it doesn't use the same colors or same sort of shade of colors. But yeah, that's a quick overview. I'm sure I'm going to remember a few more things that I wanted to mention here, but Yanis, anything particular from your side?
Yeah, well, I mean, in this report, there was a nice kind of different angle at looking at things. But to me, what really lacked is like kind of this big picture first, because I always start with, like, as it said there, start big. So we start with the big picture and then go into the details. So it's kind of the next level where you do the month to month. That from that perspective, that was good. I like that there was these comparisons all over the place. But again, I was set off by the fact that you are using these random colors for these different kind of comparison values, because if you switch back to this other view, so we can see that at the bottom, expense increase, for instance, is orange, but revenue increase is like the other color, and it's even less than the other one is high. So like, what's the meaning of the color? So just adding, I mean, okay, I understand that you're pointing out that the expense is growing, but it's growing less than the revenue is growing, right? So, I mean, maybe you should add some scale, or like make it kind of more kind of unified to understand what you're trying to emphasize where. So that'll be one thing. Other thing is that, yeah, so if you do the change view to the 6 timelines, that actually I like even better to some degree, because for me, if I need to have a high-level overview, I have all of that there. Again, I'd probably use a bit more conditional formatting, just to again point out months that were better compared to others. But in fact, I did like this part quite a lot. In Insights page, there was one thing I wanted to point out to, if you go to the Insights, which was kind of again thing. Yeah, that's another non-working slide,
Yeah.
so you need to go back and then. So when I try to click on the sales in the revenue contribution bar, you see that nothing really happens. Well, it happens, but to not as much as you'd want to. But my point was that if there was the business line to begin with, that would be even better, because here you have business line selector, but it's so invisible. It's actually at the top in this turquoise color. So if you go right, then you can actually select these business lines. I mean, they were completely invisible for me in the beginning, right? Normally, we've used to have like these high-level dimensions in the visual themselves. Just click, drill down, and go to next level. That makes it more helpful. And also, do not replicate those dimensions, because here, if you click on a cogs bar for me, you see that yeah. So and then on the sales bar. Okay, yeah. So in this case, that was fine. Yeah, no kind of issues about that. But here you also saw that the chart, you can also come in a situation where you have a measure that just provides no data. So if you encounter a situation like that, also make sure to have a measure that provides not just blank, but provides like a zeros. And so that way you can avoid having situations where your chart does not show up because you have filtered data such way that there's just no data to show, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind, that play around with our slicers to see if it all works nice. And finally, if we go to the income statement, I think this table is a good example of how not to make tables because I mean there's like no custom formatting, nothing, right? Again, it's just a blob of data. Please use like conditional formatting or to make it more sense. Again, provide some pointers what to look at and why. Because if you switch over to this waterfall, of course it's less data, but I mean it's much more useful, I think, in this case, because again it provides all the information. You can drill down and do things as you need, and actually you can combine this with a smaller table. Probably that will make even more sense. So tables are good, but please think from user perspective what they should see in these tables. Like if you're adding table, why you're adding the table, what I should be able to see there. If you want to just have an export of data, there is already a feature called 3 dots export data, right? So you don't need to create an export of data in the report. That's not why reports are being built. So just keep that in mind. Do not have redundant elements. There must be a reason for every element in your report, because every redundant element just consumes the user time, creates confusion for you, for user, and at the end of the day is not helpful. So keep the visual number to the minimum to get the maximum performance. That would be my final kind of remark here.
All right. We've gone through all of them, so I guess it's time to announce the winner, right? So
Yeah,
without further
absolutely.
ado, the winner of this month's challenge is, we're going to close this so we can see the full page, is Iris Mayuda Krago. So congratulations to you, Iris.
Congratulations.
Woo! So yeah, congratulations. Out of all the reports, you were the highest rated report in this particular challenge. Don't forget, guys, that these are monthly challenges. So next month, you have another possibility to participate in them. For some of you, you might think that winning is the most important part about it, but it's really not. What the challenges are all about, it's about giving you an opportunity to try out new things. Try out different visuals, try out different approaches. Like you've heard now, right? Giannis mentioned countless times how important field parameters are. So if you haven't used them, try them out, see what you can do with them. Trust me, nowadays you have hundreds of videos covering the same field parameters. So there's enough information out there, trust me. Try out different visual switches, bookmarks, different page navigations. Just play around with things, because every single day when you are building these on your workplace environment, you're going to be building most of the time very similar things. These challenges allow you to get outside of your comfort zone and try out new things. Or if you haven't done this, or you don't really do this for a company in particular, you're just trying out new things, this is a great way on how you can try it out on different data sets. Because trust me, different approaches, different visuals is what you have to learn in order to be proficient in data visualization. It's very important to understand the very basics. So read about the base concept of every single visual so you can understand what it's meant for. There are a lot of visual cheat sheets, visual guides, a lot of these sort of stuff that you can go through and kind of get an overall understanding. But yeah, so congratulations to Iris once again. Congratulations to everyone who has gotten into the top 5. And thank you and appreciate every single one of you who participated in the challenge. Because without you guys, we wouldn't be here. It's as simple as that. Because otherwise, we would have done some other meetings or something, but nothing something like this. So I'm happy for this as well. Before we sign off, one question that we had I wanted to quickly answer is, we had a question regarding, would be great if we would cover some data modeling things or calculations that are done behind the scenes. These sort of things we usually do on the first webinar of every single challenge. So the initial webinar is a workshop where we work together with the data set, where we talk about things you should take into consideration, how you could do certain calculations, what type of visuals to use, and that sort of stuff. So if you haven't seen, or if you're going for the next challenge, make sure at least you watch the recording of the first workshop, because that's where we cover these sort of things. Giannis, from your side, any last comments, anything?
Yeah, I mean, thank you all for doing a great job and participating in the challenge in the first place. I mean, going together, we're making the world a better place, because we learn how to make better reports. We learn from each other's mistakes. We find ways how to further improve visuals so you can make better reports. And I think this community is way how we can work together to make the data BI user lives much better in long term. So I'm looking forward to see you again in the next challenges, and who knows, maybe I'll jump in on some other sessions as well if the topics are such that I can add value to them. So looking forward to great submissions, and thank you, everyone.
Exactly. I mean, who knows, right? Maybe one day one of them is going to be our colleague. Who knows? I mean, it's a
Absolutely.
great way for us to look for great talents out there. So
Absolutely.
yeah, use this as an opportunity. Make sure to learn something new, and don't be afraid to try out new things. Right? Don't always go with what you think is going to be working and what you felt worked out so far. Try out new things. It's what it's all really about. So thank you everyone for your time. Appreciate all the submissions and participation, and I'll see you in the next challenge next month. All right.
Thank you. Bye
Bye
bye.
everyone.